So the cockpit's all glued up. This was actually kind of a fight. I know it's a floorboard and two sidewalls and the instrument panel, but it just kind of fought me the entire way, getting it assembled, getting it properly aligned. So it was kind of a game of tacking some glue along these bottom joins here, putting in a fuselage side, letting it set up a little bit, splaying it a little bit, and then basically the whole deal was to make sure it fit in the fuselage and the Eduard instrument panel fit in there properly. So it's all in there, it's all aligned, it's nice and steady and stable now. But yeah, it was a little bit of a pain in the ass to get, you know, set up and making sure it looks good and sits good in the fuselage. During the test fitting, I did learn a few things about the ultracast resin seat. The resin seat is actually too short by, I forget how thick this is, but anyways, I had to add, you see this white part in here, that's some styrene shim, and it's just sitting on top of where the kit mount would be for the kit part. And when I drop this in the fuselage halves, it gives it a good area for the seat to sit. Get a piece of tape. Basically what happens when you get the two fuselages, you know, halves together, they're all, you know, copacetic, ready to get glued. The seat kind of needs to be inserted separately. And what I've learned through all the test fitting and playing around with this, the seat needs to go in later. So as you can see here, I'll bring this a little bit closer. The white part is that styrene shim, and that's going to lift the seat up. In the back of the headrest, you see these two holes. There are corresponding pins on the back of the ultracast seat and the headrest on the kit seat that go into it. So if you're using the kit parts, the way this goes together is you glue the two fuselage halves together, you get it all set up. The seat's already installed. The armored headrest, which is this top part with the pins, then gets installed later, and it's a two-part piece. But obviously the ultracast seat is one solid cast resin part with that armored headrest already there. So what's going to happen is it's a good thing how I look at it. So I can install all the glass. The gun sight needs to go in still. I can do all that. I can mask it and everything, and it's good. I can just let it be. At the end, when I do final assembly, I can get this dropped in here. And, you know, sure, you're like, oh, you got that white styrene there. The way I've lined it up is that it won't be shown when this gets installed. So it's a little bit, you know, you just got to manipulate this around a little bit, but it just kind of drops in there. And then, you know, a little bit of glue. And if you can see, the seat's installed. You can't see the styrene shim, and it just lifts it up perfectly to line it up with those mounting holes in the back of the fuselage. So, you know, there's a seam that's going to need to be filled there, but, you know, that's looking the part. So I feel confident now that I can start gluing this together. There's two other little things I need to kind of take a look at on the fuselage halves. I got this kind of wonky front end here, which I think is affecting the fit of the nose insert, which goes in on the bottom here. But you need to take a look at that. And then the other thing that I need to do is, since I'm going to be using a resin replacement air scoop, I need to fill in these holes because the air scoop is thinner than the kit part, so some of these holes are showed. So I'm just going to get some styrene stock rod that will fit to size and just glue those in there, then trim them down to size. I'm going to get some things ready. I'm going to do a little background work, and then when I'm getting ready to do a couple things, I'll come back and show you what's getting done on the fuselage. All right, so one of the things that needs to get done here is these air scoops that go here on the side of the fuselage. You know, this is the resin replacement one, this dark color, and then this is the plastic molded piece. The size, basically the thickness is kind of the main deal. It wasn't that chunky. You know, this looks pretty good. You can totally use this. You're gonna have to do some seam work on it, but that install looks all right. This though just kind of looks a little bit more to scale. it looks better to me. But some of the things that need to get done to install this is these two holes that are for the mounting parts, mounting pins for the kit part need to get filled in because they are somewhat visible behind this if you line it up correctly. So just want to get those filled in so it's looking the part. I'm just gonna use some styrene rods. So I have here. All right, so to plug out these holes, I got some of this evergreen scale models, and this is 3/64 rod. It's solid rod, and then it looks like this. This is actually the perfect diameter. It fits in there nice and snug, just like so. So all I got to do is cut a couple pieces here with my sprue cutters. I'm not going to need anything huge. Let me zoom out a little bit. And they don't need to be massive, but I'm going to give me a little bit of room to work around with. So just those two little pieces right there. And you can see them right here. Save the rest leftover stuff. I'm just going to get this. Insert it there. Insert it there. Use some of this quick setting Tamiya extra thin. Okay, those are in there glued. I'm just gonna let those set up for a few minutes and I'll come by and I'll retrim out with my Tamiya sprue cutters. And then we can do some aligning with the parts, and then we'll make sure to go about getting that installed in a minute. Okay, while I was waiting for the these plugs to set up and dry, I did a overall tape test fit of the airframe, and for the most part, everything looks like it's going to go together pretty well. There's a couple areas where I might need to remove a couple of the attachment pins because there's a couple spots along here that just don't line up with the pins. So I'll have to slide those off so I can kind of get the fuselage aligned properly. If you see like right here, there's like a little step here in the cockpit right there, and it affects kind of everything. So if I chop all the pins off and just line up, I think I'll be good. But you know, the wings look like they fit pretty well. There'll be a little bit of a seam cleanup to be filled here. I can ruin this piece of tape. You know, and typical of these kind of Hasegawa, even Tamiya at this time frame kind of had that issue. So there's a little bit of a gap here that'll probably have to be taken care of with, you know, either some super glue or styrene shim, but nothing too kind of drastic. But yeah, I like to do this to kind of get a little bit of overview of areas that maybe I could potentially see before I do the assembly, so I can attack it a little bit differently. The one big spot here that is a problem is this nose insert that goes at the bottom here. And when you slap this thing on, there's some good positive locating pins, points, and it just kind of clicks into place. Watch, I can't do it on camera, but there we go. But so everything around this seam right here looks pretty good. It's just when you get to, let me get something to point with. When you get to this part right here, it is pretty terrible. This should be a seamless transition from the wing root into this nose part. It's not so bad on this side, but it's just, you know, if you look at reference photos, like I pulled one up here of this dead on, you know, it's a pretty smooth transition from that, you know, that part removes to expose the bottom of the engine. And obviously that's the oil cooler. So that goes directly in, you know, a smooth transition from that panel into the wing root. And you don't get that with how this is looking. I do know when I removed this, whoops, and that just flew off into oblivion. Let me find that. Oh, here it is. When I removed this piece off of the sprue, I noticed that there was an ejector pin area right here. It was kind of like an L. And I sanded it out, and definitely when I sanded it, I definitely removed some material that probably affected the shape. But still, I'm gonna have to figure out how the best way to go about blending that in to the wing root to make it a nice, smooth, curved transition into the wing root. Okay, so I'm getting ready to install this air intake on the side of the fuselage where we did the plugs with the styrene rod. For this, I'm just going to use some of this Loctite liquid super glue and a toothpick. I'll try to do as much of this as I can on screen, so it's zoomed out a little bit. But basically, the plan is the forward tip of this intake right here lines up right behind this the first little pin that we added. So it's kind of have a little mark on here. I just want to make sure it's all lined up. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just take my toothpick. I can go into this a little bit here. Take my toothpick. I have some super glue here in this little tray. And I'm just going to dot some small dots of super glue in a row. Too much. Now I'm gonna get my part in here, drop it into place, get it all aligned. I like this super glue. It does set up a little fast, but it's nice and liquidy, so it kind of zips its way around. I'm just gonna hold that in place. Make sure it's lined up. It's the back part of this, the narrower part that's not sticking down. So just gonna make sure it's looking good and lined up. All right, looks like it's doing all right. Okay, so now I'm gonna get this knife blade handle with a needle in it, and I'm gonna take the needle and I'm gonna try to get some of this super glue into that joint underneath, on top and bottom. Just let the capillary reaction of the super glue do its thing, and then I'm gonna press down, and I want that side to set up, so I'm gonna hold this for a minute or two. I could hit it with some kicker, but I need both hands to do this, and the kicker is over there. I should have done that before. That would have been better thinking. Okay, bottom's looking good. There's a little bit of a gap towards the very, very end here, which might need to get just a little bit of some liquid putty application to help it out. One more small application of the super glue here. Yeah, but that looks all right. It's in there. Fits the contours. Like I said, they'll probably need a little bit of touch up around it with some Mr. Surfer to get this. There's like a slight gap there where it just doesn't conform to the contour of the fuselage the best. But yeah, I'll take it. All right, it's been about 10 minutes and got that air scoop all installed. If you notice the white hazing around it, that is from some debonder that I rubbed on it. It does tend to craze the paint, but after that settled out, I then took some 1500 sponge and then I sanded around it, just making sure the transition was all nice and smooth. It seems pretty good. I'm not going to give it primer yet. When I get a little bit closer to after the fuselage halves are assembled, I'll then put some primer on it and see how it is and make any adjustments. But that's in there. It's nice and secure. I ended up taking care of the gap on the top with, I just used a very, very sharp sewing needle. You know, it's a little full of stuff now, but basically I got some of that liquid super glue on the very, very tip. And then where there was a seam, I just ran the very tip with the super glue so it focused along the seam. Let that get in there, hit it with some kicker. The kicker will allow the super glue to kind of work its way around. And then I just build that little gap up with the super glue. So I should have shown that on camera. It's a useful little tip, but I just didn't think about it when I was doing it. But that's all installed. Looking the part. There's a little bit of super glue on the top here that I need to sand away, but that's install, looking good. So we can now move towards the next step. If you see here, I removed all of the locating pins from the fuselage side after, you know, I kind of did some test fitting again. I slapped the sides together and I realized that like one of the pins is just off. So I just took all of them off, and without them there, I get a pretty good alignment. I'll have to kind of tack and go as I assemble the fuselage, but I think the cockpit tub itself will actually do a good job of kind of bringing some things into place. So I'm going to clear this stuff up. Luckily, the cockpit can just get glued in with normal styrene cement. So I'm going to use a combination of the Tamiya extra thin and some of this Mr. Hobby, Mr. Cement S to get that installed. So I'm going to get this super glue put away so I don't, you know, drop a piece in it and get super glue all over it. And then just a general cleanup so it can work kind of in a clutter-free space. So I'll be back in a second. All right, before dropping the cockpit tub in there, I just kind of went over the directions one more time just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And then also wanted to make sure that for the actual steps, I didn't, you know, there weren't any holes that need to be drilled out or any little things like that. Like here, you know, do not cement this prop spinner thing. You know, I really don't care about that, but I'll get that installed. Maybe I'll figure out how I want the prop to be situated at the end. It does have like a little like square nut at the end of it, so it fits into the spinner hub itself. But just want to make sure that we got all the parts and we're ready to go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get one half of the fuselage or the cockpit into the fuselage, let that set up, and then I'll start to work my way in getting the other side of the fuselage attached. So I'm gonna start on this side of the fuselage. There's two locating tabs on the bottom of this floorboard, one here and one here, and they locate in these little open areas in the fuselage. So I'm just going to kind of do a test fit, make sure that's all good, and then part of the cockpit wall, you get this aligned, it'll be kind of hard to see. Maybe if I do it this angle and get something to point with. You see here this lip right here. Hopefully I get this to focus here. This lip right here notches into the bottom of that lip in the fuselage wall. So I'll probably run some extra thin along that as well. Make sure I'm all looking good here. Panel lines and stuff to line up, so I'm going to get things kind of situated. Let me zoom out here so you can see what I'm doing. I always tend to work towards this edge of the desk, and I apologize for that. Okay. All right, let's get some tape. So, okay, that should be pretty good. Like before with those pins in there, this headrest back area didn't line up. So like this is the mounting hole for the antenna. That was all cockeyed. And then this area, still, it's not perfect, but above the instrument panel wasn't aligned. So there was not a step, but they're misaligned. And then this little like intake up here was stepped out. So much better place with just kind of doing that along the way. So what I'll do here, just going to check all my seams around before I add glue. And it looks like everything's lined up pretty good. So, you know, some strategic gluing, some slow gluing always pays off in the long run. So yeah, just make sure if, you know, your things aren't lining up for you, just kind of take a look at it. Maybe it helps to remove some locating tabs or some pins and, you know, just kind of get a better surface to work with, you know, just flush on flush contact. Yeah, this looks pretty good right now. So yeah, we're gonna let this kind of just set up probably overnight before we do any sanding or anything on it. What I'm gonna do is just to make sure that this still fits after kind of pressing that closed. Yeah, it looks pretty good actually. Okay, so getting the wings together is going to be a few things to take care of. Mainly, we need to add in this brass and set, which involves some pieces of the kit parts, and then a bunch of resin and some photo etch that's actually in this. Some other things to look at was some references. I mentioned in the first video that some of the 202s had their wing guns, which is represented by just a small bump in the kit part here. Let's see if that comes through. There's just a little bump on there that's supposed to be the gun. Doing some research and looking at, I don't know how well this will show with all the glare, but with Ennio's plane, he has his wing guns removed. They've been completely removed due to operational issues. I believe they jammed or something. But he does not have his wing gun. So all I got to do is remove that little bump off of the wing, sand it over. I'm not quite sure if when they did that, if there's like a scribed circular area, if that was filled in, covered. I'm not 100% sure. So might have to do a little more work to find some resources, research material about that. But I know I can go ahead and remove this gun on both wings. So yeah, that's good that I was able to find the extra reference photos about that. Not only was that photo that I brought up there, but you can even see it on this one as well, that the gun, it kind of has like a hump that shows up where the barrel is, but it's been removed on that one as well. So we know we're consistent that in two pictures he didn't have the wing machine guns. Okay, so I've been going through this Eduard brass and direction set, and I've made a few decisions. The resin piece is beautiful. Like this is the resin cast piece compared to that's, I'll just align this. That's this top part here, and then that's the bottom part of the kit part. So definitely a huge upgrade. So this would look like that. So definitely a huge upgrade with all the hosing and everything. And then there's some more hoses that get added in here. So these are nicely cast. I can't tell if these look like they're 3D printed, but I might be wrong. But these are more hoses that go into that resin piece. But just kind of going through the directions. It gives all the color callouts for everything, which is great. Sure, it's in the underneath. You don't know how much of it's going to be seen. And then also some photo etch that goes in there. So that's page 1. This is the part where I'm kind of make a business decision. What they want you to do here is they want you to take this plastic piece here, and they want you to remove all the detail off of it. So it's just a flat piece of plastic. and they want you to add this piece of photo etch on it. I am not going to do that. I'm just going to leave this as is. I took care of all the ejector pins that were in this piece. You know, comparing and contrasting it, you know, sure, it's a little bit more defined. What I can do if I wanted to is I could take a rivet wheel and rivet along it to mimic it. That's really the only thing that kind of shows up the difference. There's some riveting. You know, the panels in there are a little bit more defined. This probably isn't the best because it's reflecting back at you. But I'm just going to skip that. I'm going to leave this part as is. You know, it allows me to mount the kit hardware directly to this with glue. I don't have to use super glue. I don't have to worry about, you know, glue, you know, super glue not having a strong bond and running the risk of breaking the gear and stuff. But after looking at this, I can make this work by using the kit part. So what I'll do is I'll cut this part out. I'm going to use it as a template because there's some extra holes that need to get drilled according to this. So I'll drill that work with more of the resin. So I'll go in there and I'll drill those out so that works. But basically, you know, there's a couple of PE parts that mimic parts of this, which, whatever, you're not going to see in much detail underneath there unless I put it on a mirror, which I'm not going to. Moving along in these directions. There's some PE wire harnesses that get set up in there as well. I'll probably add those, or maybe I'll use some lead wire since it, you know, mimics wire a little bit better than these flat PE parts. Another thing I'm going to make a business decision on, I'm not going to remove this part of the wing. They want you to remove this like triangle thing. I'm not going to chop that out and run the risk of ruining the structural integrity of the wing, especially after it gets glued up with extra thin. So I'm going to skip step 12 and step 13 where you add a photo etch replacement. I'm just not going to do that. I won't have to deal with all that. Yeah, sure, it's detail that's facing up into the wheel bay, so I'm not going to do that. And at the end here, as everything gets aligned and put together, some more photo etch wiring harnesses, etc., etc. So, yeah, like I said, I'm going to make a business decision. I'm going to do what I think is simple for me, but still add some details without, you know, ruining the kit parts too heavily. And, you know, like I said, it's a under bay carriage door area, which is not going to be seen, you know, very well. So I'm going to go and start cutting some of these resin pipes and stuff off carefully off screen and maybe start getting those installed. I'll drill the holes that need to be adapted into this piece for some of the hosing. And then when we get ready for paint and that kind of stuff, I'll come back and we'll catch up then. Like I said, we're spraying the MRP Fine Service Primer Black out of PS 771, and we are shooting at 15 PSI. But I've also knocked the MAC valve down a little bit, so I just want to get this stuff covered up pretty good. Parts like this, you got to really kind of hit from all the different angles, so you're getting... Okay, so the major parts have been base coated in this MRP 317, the anti-corrosive color that we use in the cockpit, sprayed over the black primer with a little bit of modeling coat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to brush paint some of the details based on the directions. There's pretty good call outs on here. So I just need to find all the colors I need. I need brown, flat black, a flat blue, a flat green, and flat yellow, and some silver for most of the detailing. So I'm going to go find my colors in my brush painting area, and then I will... I'm not going to show you brush painting because I'm going to need my head over and blocking the camera the entire time. So I'll start on with the detail painting and I'll come back when I'm done. All right, so a little bit of progress. I got the fuselage, the gear bay painted up, and it's installed in the wing section but not into the fuselage yet. This is just a kind of test fit to see how it looks, but the Eduard Brassin set, which is this guy that I use. It's a neat little set. Some parts of it are kind of fragile. I did manage to break a couple of these hoses in here, removing them from the casting block. So there's a couple hoses missing, but all in all, it looks pretty busy and looks the part. I'm gonna weather this towards the end, so it kind of matches all the weathering going on the underside. So they'll get some panel lines and some dust and stuff like that. And then I'm gonna add some wire in there later on. I was worried about putting the wire in there and then weathering it later and, you know, tearing some of that wiring out. So I saved the Eduard wiring and I'll put that in later. Okay, so the fuselage section has had 24 hours to settle up. Glued it yesterday, left it overnight. Like I said before, I removed all the locating tabs to allow alignment to work a little bit better in my favor. So the focus was to line up all the panel lines on the top side, and then we'll correct the bottom. So the bottom is not too bad. There's one panel line down here towards the tail wheel that needs to be connected. Otherwise, there is just a little bit of a step right here that needs to get taken care of, and that could be very easily taken care of with some sandpaper. And then on the top side, all these panels on the top of the spine here of the tail are all lined up, and then up here we're all lined up. And then the tail and the rudder just needs a light sand over, and that's looking pretty good. One of the things I like to do before I start sanding, especially on areas where there's panel lines, is I like to just kind of refine the panel line with some scribing tools before I start sanding. So I'll dig out the panel line so that when I'm sanding, I'm not completely eliminating the panel line. Since the panel lines on Hasegawa kits are so fine, I'll just saw them out a little bit so they're more refined, do my sanding work, and then maybe I'll have to come in with just a light scribe over, and the panel line will be looking good. So what I'm going to do, I already talked about kind of how I do scribing and the tools I use, but I have this MRP scriber right here, which is the narrow type, and then I have these Tamiya craft saws that are really good for just doing straight lines. So I'm just going to go do some light scribing around the airframe. Okay, so I've gone around and done some, I guess, pre-scribing to get ready for the sanding. And then I've also installed the gun port area on the top. When you drop this in, there's a little bit of a gap that goes around, and this is a natural panel line. It's kind of this, let me get this to focus here. This kind of like curvy line is a natural panel line. And when you drop this in, it's kind of a gap. But what I learned is if you lift up the front, so I used a little bit of styrene stock here to create a shim. If you lift it up and then put pressure on both sides of the fuselage, you can eliminate that gap pretty significantly. I have one small gap right here that I can probably just take care of, maybe with another go of some glue and some more pressure, or some just Mr. Surfacer, 1200 or something, or 1000 will be fine. And then I do have to there's a little bit of a step right here that I can just file down with some Stanley sticks or with some metal files. But this shim in the front, let me kind of go back here. I glued the back of this first, and I really controlled it. Left no glue in this area around this part. I then, after I glued this, I put the styrene shim in here to keep it up. Then I went and added the glue around and added pressure to eliminate that gap. So, like I said, just have to go in with some files after this really cures out and round that over and get that nice and smooth. And then we'll see how this is doing. Probably in 24 hours, let this fully cure out and see if we need to add some surfacer in there before we start re-scribing. We'll see how that kind of goes overnight. And then I've also glued up the wings, and I'm going to do some pre-scribing on the panel lines at the leading edge before I start sanding this. So I'll do that scribing, make sure we're all set, and then I'll let everything go overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow and do our final sanding, and then we'll do some of the final re-scribing afterwards. So that's where we're at right now, moving along, hopefully to get you know, the general assembly of this thing as close as done as possible, hopefully by the end of this video. So we'll see what happens. All right, so I've been doing some scribing here. Most of the work has been done on the leading edge of the wings. There's 3 scribe lines here, and then towards the wing tips on both sides, and then along the top of the fuselage here towards the tail. A couple areas need to get just kind of re-scribed back in after I did some sanding. The tail cone, and then this area in front of the cockpit nose. There's a lot of kind of like intricate riveting and Zeus fasteners and that kind of stuff, or the Italian version of Zeus fasteners that just need to get scribed in. So it's looking all right now. So I'm going to start getting ready to install the wing into the fuselage. So probably going to need some tactical gluing here to work my way around. The fit right here is decent. It creates a little bit of a lift if there's no pressure, so I'm going to glue this first to get this to sit down, and then I need to fill in this area, and then there's some more panel lines that need to get scribed into the wing part. So I want to get this situated and let that kind of go off overnight to get a good join in there, and then yeah, I'm going to get things set up here. I'm going to get some tape, and we're going to, you know, kind of strategically glue as we go here and get it all set up, so then we can start to fix things tomorrow. All right, so I was just being a little careful with this joint here. If you don't get some pressure on this part here, you can get a step. It seems pretty smooth right now, and then I have to fill in this seam right here eventually. So just want to get that as nice looking as possible before I move on to the forward part of the fuselage. So as I test, fit, and press up here, it looks like once that gets glued, looks like it'll be pretty good. So I'm gonna, so as I move to the top of the wings into the wing roots, off the bat, there's a little bit of a gap on this wing. This wing seems pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some glue into it, but I'm also going to use some rubber bands to kind of get a little bit of an upward pull and pull the dihedral up a little bit. Now the 202's dihedral is pretty flat, so I don't want to overdo it. So just a little bit of slight pressure should get that gap to fill in. So we get some rubber bands here. All right, just adding those rubber bands already did a pretty good job of closing this front wing root, though. Tell that's popped open, or it's just some of the paint squeeging out of it, but they'll have to get sanded back in a little bit. So, okay, I'm just gonna let that sit for probably just overnight. Just get that glued, let the rubber bands do its work. It's not overly stressing the dihedral. It's keeping it nice and flat, and good equal pressure across the wing on all the surfaces. So that's good to go. So now we can kind of start working on some of the smaller bits. Maybe, you know, take some stuff off of the trees or the spruce, get them cleaned up and get them ready for paint a little bit later. And then after this sets up over, you know, I'm gonna leave this overnight to let the glue really go at it. Then we can go and finalize do some sanding, some seam checks. There's a couple, I know right here, there's these like brackets here that need to get kind of filled and sanded over, and then they need to get scribed back into the wing. But otherwise, it's looking pretty good. Okay, doing a little body work on the 202 here, mostly focusing on the wing root. So what I have is kind of this curved blade, and there's a little bit of a step on both sides of the wing root where this half meets the wing root fillet here. So I'm just kind of taking my knife And I'm just, with the curved part of it, lightly scraping through and knocking that down. It's a little rough, but all I gotta do is go over it with some sanding sponges and that'll be nice and smooth, and I can go ahead and re-scribe the area back in. And that'll be looking good. So I need to do the other side, so I'm gonna work on the other side and then I'll come back. Okay, so the wing root's been smoothed out with that scalpel blade, and then it was given a sanding over with, this is 800 grit Infini sanding sponge. So I just worked that in. I have a couple small pieces here, and I just worked my way around it to get out any grooves or rough spots that might have been there from the blade. All right, so since this gap also needs to kind of conform into this nose part, I'm going to use a two-part epoxy. So I have two different ones here. This is Need Light blue-yellow epoxy putty tape. You basically just cut a piece of this, roll it around, make sure it mixes into each other, and then it's workable with a little bit of water. And then there's, I think most people are familiar with Milliput, but it's basically the same thing. You take equal parts of both, you roll them around, get them into a little ball, and then you can start laying them out. And you can work out a piece of it into your part. And then, like, I think with this stuff, it's, let's say 4 to 5 hours to bond completely to plastic, and then you can sand it. And this says 3 to 4 hours in normal room temperature. Then you can start working on it as well. So I think I have this open already. This is a fresh new thing. I think I might try this, but then again, I think the air might have gotten to this, so this might be bad. So let me futz around with this to see which one is still working. If this stuff's still working, I'll just use this. If not, I'll crack open the Milliput. All right, so I definitely cut off way more than I need, but I'm not quite sure how good this stuff still is. I had to cut like 5 inches off the tape because it was all completely solid and like it wasn't malleable. So you just kind of take this stuff, fold it into itself, and start to roll it around. This stuff's incredibly thick. I don't know if this stuff still works anymore. But okay, I think we're in a good spot with this. So I got some water here and put that here. Get a little cup here. Knock everything over on my bench. Another useful tool while you're using this stuff are these are rubber brushes, sculpting brushes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this kind of flat one to get that. I'm going to get this wet in here a little bit first. Let's get this, I'm going to pack that in there. And I'm going to take my little rubber brush and I'm just going to pack that into that spot. A lot of excess here. Just kind of get it packed in there. Any excess in areas I don't want, I'll just cut it out and then yank it out with my tweezers. Some more water here. I'm just going to wet this and smooth. So I'm just using the end of the brush to kind of roll that into place. And then, like I said, don't want it. I want to try to keep the panel line separate because that is a natural break on this piece. There's a nice smooth transition from that panel to wing root, and then I can scribe the panel line around that later. Okay, so I got that filled in on both sides. So now I need to play the waiting game and wait for this to fully dry out before I go and start sanding it. If you start getting at it after it too soon, you just pull it out of the the gap, and it won't sand. It'll just kind of crumple up on you. All right, it's been a few days since I've actually started to work on the nose work that I did with the green stuff. I'm on my I think this is my last round of kind of sanding and then priming and then checking. As you can see, I got some black paint in some strategic areas where I'm just checking, some scribing work that I did, filling in these ejection ports at the bottom, more re-scribing work on the top. So basically wherever I did a lot of extensive scribing work, body work, has gotten the black primer, and things are looking pretty good. This needs probably one more sand through. We'll see. But it's in a good spot. It's nice and blended in. It looks the part. I did eliminate some detail in here. It's going to be hard to see. But there's some fake latches. So there's one right here that I sanded away. So I need to recreate that with some styrene sheet. And then also on the top of the wings, there's some, I don't know if they're brackets or reinforcement parts, but they're kind of long rectangular sheet, but they're narrow, that kind of run right here and right here on both sides of the wings. I sanded that away, and so I'm just going to recreate that with some styrene rod or a sheet or something like that. So we're in a good spot. Things are looking good. So hopefully in the next update here, we will be ready for primer. So let me come back and do a little bit more work, and we'll see where we end up. Okay, so I added the plastic card detail on the top of the wings here, and then these little latches on the side of the cowl. It'll focus. Doesn't want to focus. There it goes. So there's two there, and then there's two on the other side. It's gonna be hard to see, but also in here I drilled out a couple little holes, so it looks like some type of screw head or something like that. So they're a little out of scale because they're a little thick, but it works, especially when you get some paint on it, and I think it'll settle down nicely. So I just used evergreen styrene sheet here. This particular one was used on the top side, and after these were glued in place, they were heavily sanded down because they were significantly stepped up. So I used some of these jeweler's files, and I just kind of sanded them down and got them. They're almost flush. There's a little bit of a lip. I think it'll look good if they get weathered in a little bit. And then I didn't want to mess any more sanding in this area, so I'm just gonna leave those as is. I'm gonna do one more pass of primer just to make sure everything looks good. I need to check these seam lines up on the top since I've done some sanding. But I'm gonna call this episode a wrap. And when we move to the next episode, we will have everything in full primer, and we'll start the painting process, and also show you some paint tests that I've done over the last couple nights as well. So, all right, kind of the last spot check with some primer. Installed this little chin radiator type thing, and then just kind of done a last coat of primer. I had some primer left in the color cup. So, just checked the top of the wing roots here with those braces I added in, the side braces on the cowl. Everything's looking pretty good. It looks like definitely primer is ready. We're ready for primer. So, yeah, we will move along, and we will get to the next episode soon.